Well, hello, everybody. Welcome back to our conversation. My name is Colm. I'm the youth ministry coordinator here at St. Anne's Parish in Saskatoon, and with me, as usual,
I'm Father Matthew. I'm the pastor here at St. Anne's.
All right. We are in, is it Passiontide? The last 2 weeks, we're kind of, we're in the back half of Lent.
Very close, absolutely.
The countdown, Christmas and Triduum. Some of my
statues
favorite.
are veiled already in the church.
Some of my, I have to say, very thorough are art decor people, because usually I just think of the main corpus on the cross in the church, but they got the Holy Family under our vigil candle, and even the crucifix that's in the hall somebody covered. I was like, wow, these guys, they're on top of it.
And I came in while we have great volunteers doing this as she was veiling, because the crucifix in the hall is pretty high up, but we have people sitting there, of course, for Mass now with the bigger numbers.
Yeah.
So she was on a stepladder with a paddle. I don't know where she got you'd use to paddle a rubber thing you blow up, and she had this
That's a very confusing description.
like those little rubber boats you would use.
Oh,
this cheap plastic paddle you'd use for a boat like that.
Yeah.
On the ladder, lifting this fabric up to hang it on top of the cross.
Oh. Do you know? I know what that paddle is.
Oh yeah.
It was our youth series last year. The first one I did when I came to this parish was called Lifelines.
Oh, okay.
And we did a game where we did a relay and we dragged people on inflatable rafts.
Yeah, there
that
you
got
go.
at Walmart.
That's what I was looking for.
And so it was
raft.
rafts. That's the thing. Yeah. And we had these little paddles. So I thought they were in my office, but either way, that's probably unless someone else has a paddle in the church. But that's
okay.
I know there's paddles in the church because of that.
But a lot of work anyway going into covering everything up.
Oh, that's cool. That's it's fun to kind of. I'm just so excited to celebrate, the end of Lent and the Triduum and Easter with people in church, because that was the big thing we didn't have last year. And even though we're not full capacity, we're a bit closer after this weekend. So
yeah, we had our first weekend with so it's now 30% capacity. We used to have a hard cap of only 30 people total, regardless of the size of the building, which was difficult for us. But now it's 30% capacity to a max of 150 people. And for us with church and hall together, our capacity is around 900 people. So 150 we can easily do with a lot of space.
Yeah.
So we got some in the church, some in the hall, but we're up to 150 now, which is really nice.
Yeah, and even I just appreciated the flexibility, because usually, with our sign-ups when it was 30, if you didn't get in there kind of, Friday afternoon or whatever, they filled up pretty quick. The evening masses, there's a bit more space, so that's a little hack for you if you're having a hard time.
Yeah.
Usually the 7 o'clock ones, you can get in there. But we were going to come Saturday, and then the sun wasn't feeling too hot, and or just scheduling. I was like, okay, now I have to cancel, and then to reschedule. And I was like, oh, there's room on Sunday. And I got to 11 o'clock mass, which I don't think we haven't gotten into 11 in a long time. So that was fun. Saw a few different faces, and
No, it's great.
So
we're looking forward to that. And I am though feeling for our brothers and sisters in Regina.
Yeah,
they've got a bit of a localized outbreak there, so they are still capped at 30 people.
Yeah, and
some of they will be through Easter as well, which is hard for them, but I think makes sense given the situation they're in.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I'm not an expert in all those fields and the best decisions, but I mean, clearly they're in a bit of a tougher spot than we are. But just we talked about a little bit of suffering and pain, and maybe that's us being with them is. Yeah. Part of me felt a little guilty as we got a little bit more, and they had hopefully the same hope as us of expanding, but that's not coming there. So prayers to our Regina friends.
Yes,
for sure. Do we want to dive into this weekend now that we talked about kind of community localized suffering?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. So the gospel reading for this weekend was the raising of Lazarus. We're still doing the scrutinies, as we've got a great group we're going to be bringing into the church at Easter. And so the scrutiny reading for this Sunday being the raising of Lazarus. And still within the theme of building freedom, but I thought the focus I would take this time, based on the readings we have, is a bit of how God sees us in our slavery and in our freedom. So I thought as we see Jesus there facing Lazarus, and especially the death of Lazarus, we do see, because Jesus is God himself, God facing our slavery to sin and death. And then how does God respond to that? How does Jesus respond to it? And then so maybe I'll just read here the key passage. I reread this too in the homily. But it's a moment where Mary, and not Mary the mother of Jesus, Mary who's the brother of Lazarus, comes to Jesus, her brother's dead. And it's interesting, both her and Martha say the same thing when Jesus comes. They say, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died.
Yeah.
And that's quite an accusation. And you see why they would have thought, this is their friend Jesus who was healing lepers and healing blind people. And they tell him, they send word saying, your friend Lazarus, our brother, is dying, meaning like come and save him. And Jesus kind of dilly-dallies up in Galilee, and he takes some time.
They don't use the exact word in scripture, but it does. To us, we're kind of like, dude, like, get over there.
And you can see they think that, right? If you had been here, if you had come here sooner, my brother would not have died.
Yeah.
So there's friends of Jesus kind of giving him a hard time over this, like angry with him over this.
For sure.
And then so Mary says that to Jesus, Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. Her sister Martha said that earlier. And then it says in the gospel, when Jesus saw her weeping. So imagine Mary there. She's saying this angry at Jesus, also weeping at the loss of her brother, her frustration, all those emotions we feel at death. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her weeping, so a group of people there supporting her, and the Jews who came with her weeping, then it says, Jesus was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, where he laid him, they said, come and see. Jesus began to weep. And right there I want to focus in on, we have really two emotional responses of Jesus. How Jesus first was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved, and then he began to weep. And maybe before we get into that in general, it strikes me as I reflect on this passage that often, and maybe I'm right, I don't know if you relate to this, but when we tend to like imagine Jesus, and even seeing him in like movies and artwork and things like that, you often see him, I feel, as very stoic, very unemotional. Like, have you seen that? Or what?
Yeah, I would say more recent depictions of Jesus, it's maybe getting better. But when I think of, and some of them I love, like the old Jesus of Nazareth 6-hour film movie, whatever it is, like I love a lot about that. But there is a little bit of like Jesus just like passing through the world and doing his things.
Yeah, kind of unemotional.
And I've been, I wear the hoodie and whatever, that the Chosen series I like. And part of the reason I like that is you see a bit of more of an emotive Jesus, right?
Okay.
And his, that he really does have friendships with these characters. And, But I think historically sometimes we do have this image of like, okay, God became man. Yes, we believe that. But he's still kind of almost aloof is almost a word I have. Like he's there and he's doing these things, but nothing really gets to him. It kind of just like
passing through.
Yeah, I'm here, I'm going to do my stuff, but nothing you could do is really going to dissuade or change how I act.
Yeah.
But yet we have many biblical stories that prove that that's not true. Yeah. Like even like you go to the wedding feast of Cana, right? And Mary, his mom, in that case, is kind of like son, come on, help us out. And he's like, it's not my time, you know. But yet he's kind of
he does it.
He does it, right? Yeah. He listens to his mama,
Yeah, and probably the two times I think we do see Jesus acting emotionally, maybe that people are more aware of, would be the cleansing of the temple when he's tossing over the tables. Like that's pretty emotional.
For sure.
And then also the agony in the garden.
Exactly.
We even use that word agony as he's praying, knows Father to let this pass him by.
So this is
we almost see those as exceptions, I feel, often.
Yeah. Yeah, and almost like abnormal, and they must have done something really awful. Well, I mean, the garden, I think we get, because we know it's coming. But yeah, that there would have been these moments, and I really, when we start to break down these scriptures where it shows his kind of response, suddenly he becomes a lot more approachable to me.
Yeah.
And to say, wow, like maybe sometimes I've even looked at the story to say, okay, he just saw the weeping, but he was always going to raise Lazarus.
Right.
And I don't know, I'm not a scripture scholar, but like when you read this, you're kind of like, was he? Like it almost seems like the weeping really almost initiates, that it has a tangible impact on how he, decides to interact.
Yeah, that's a
and
good
move forward.
question. It does say at the beginning, I'm pretty sure Jesus says, like, he tells the disciples when they go to down to Bethany, he does say to them, I'm going to raise Lazarus. Like, I think first he says, he's asleep, I'm going to go wake him up. And they say, oh, well, if he's asleep, he'll be fine. Then he says, no, I mean, he's dead.
Yeah, and he also
so
says,
kind of hint what he's going to do.
It's to glorify the Father, right? And so I think he's God, so he has a sense of what's happening here. Yeah. But in the details of it, right? It almost, even maybe it's just the writer's intention that it it makes it seem like this is the moving, this is the initiating action, and also for me, it's just like God hears your cries.
Yeah,
God is not distant or disconnected from the pains and the sufferings that you're in.
Yeah, and that's key, that Jesus is, like the way our faith says, he is fully God and fully man. And the fact of being fully a human being would have meant emotions like we have them. So that is God sharing in these emotions as we have them.
Yeah, and I've had a lot of discussions, most often with teenagers, because that's a lot of my work, and they'll ask hard questions about, why do, bad things happen to good people? Why is there suffering? Where was God? And all this kind of stuff, and a lot of standard good questions that have to be struggled with. But one of them sometimes has been in the past of like, was this sort of an act? If he knows he's raising Lazarus, why is he crying?
Yeah.
That's a kind of a common thing that's been brought up sometimes. But to have compassion, to feel for someone is a human thing.
Oh, absolutely.
And so it is that idea of like, if he's fully man, sometimes for whatever reason, often I think we have this idea of like, well, Jesus wouldn't feel that because of his God part of him.
Right.
Like, what I mean? Like, it's almost like, well, that changes that part. And I was like, well, no, if we truly believe he's fully human, he would have that
he
whole...
would have felt all of that.
He would have felt all of it, you know? Yeah.
And so then maybe to dive into these two experiences more deeply. So first, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. And I did some reading on this. I have a few commentaries I often go to as I'm preparing for these homilies. And a few of them focus in on the Greek word there. And the Greek is embramasthai. And this is just kind of a point on translating different languages. And for those who've looked in different languages, you know how this happens sometimes. That often when you translate, we pretend you can just kind of take one word in another language means the same in the English language. And sometimes like Deus and God kind of means the same thing. But often it's a lot more nuanced than that. And especially what sometimes happens in translation that I find really interesting is there may be a word in another language for something that we don't actually have a word for in English. And maybe we'll understand it. We have an expression for it, but there's not just one word to describe it. And that's what's happening here. So that Greek embramasthai means, or it refers to an anger that is felt so deeply it's expressed physically. And I think like we know that experience, right? Like you say that's one that we've, and I have the expression, I was so angry I was shaking. I thought of maybe the closest we can get. Like, are there other ways that we kind of express this in?
I'm trying to think off the top of my head.
Think of like
when was the last time I was angry? Usually it's vocal with me. Trying to edit my words is more of a tendency. I
did actually read there's kind of a connection between embramasthai and like the way that a horse is angry and it snorts. I didn't want to talk about Jesus snorting, so I didn't bring that into the homily. But there's connection because that too that's an anger that's expressed physically, right?
Yeah, so this might be
verbally is a part of it too.
Yeah, so I was thinking in my household and myself, but the one that comes to mind, and I love him. I love my little guy Ezra, but he is very vocal, and his anger is so expressive. You can just tell, right?
Yeah.
It is. He will shout. He will stiffen up. But he does this kind of like harumph, kind of like a grunt, kind of like maybe he's like the horse. Like you can just in his breathing and that like the tension, you can tell, there's anger, but he's trying to edit it because he knows he's not allowed to throw, he's not allowed to punch, and so it's like this deep breathing, and I think I've been in that spot where sometimes I am so ready to burst. It's like I have to leave a room or exit a space. So it was interesting when we brought that up.
Yeah, like stomping out, slamming a door.
Yeah.
Like those are, I like even the examples here with Ezra are great of like the breathing changes, right? Your body gets tense. Like we know the way that anger hits us physically.
Yeah, and usually it's me. Yeah, I usually go to clean the dishes and I start slamming cupboards. So usually that's a sign to the family. Go to another floor of the house.
Needs the space.
Give him the space.
That's very fair.
The thing that really triggered, not triggered my mind, not like triggered it set me off emotionally, but was I got the being disturbed from like being moved, like I'm like, oh wow, like they're really upset, I need to respond to this. But the anger part really surprised me. Like that's why I love when you dive into these words. And I was like, I guess a question I'm kind of bringing here, and I don't know if we have solid answers for it or it's more of a speculative word, is what specifically is Jesus angry about?
At? Yeah.
Because there's a few, I guess there'd be a few different takes potentially, right?
Yeah, that's a key question. And one thing I was reflecting on too, I didn't get into the homily, is the idea, well, I guess I mentioned the phrase righteous anger. I didn't describe it at all, but I think it's worth noting that, like, we know that Jesus being fully human and without sin. We got to throw that in there too. So, and it is true that, like, within our faith, we see a room for an experience of anger that is not sinful. Yeah. Like, that's the first thing, right? And that would be about a properly ordered anger. And there are things that are bad that should make us angry. Like if you watch the news and hear about like, let's say, like, I don't know, if there's a famine somewhere, and especially if the famine is caused by like bad actors, humanity making it happen, like that should make us angry. That's the sort of thing that should make us angry.
Yeah.
And so if we look, so what would it mean for Jesus to feel anger righteously in a way that's not sinful? To me, it would not make sense that anger was directed at, say, Mary blaming him for the death of her brother. Right? Like I don't think he should be angry with her or with the other people who are around. Like that wouldn't make sense to me.
Yeah,
right? That would be an unrighteous anger, I think.
My sense was kind of two that came forward to me is he's not maybe angry that he wasn't there in time because he had the choice. He kind of had the opportunity. So that doesn't really make sense. But I was like, maybe he's anger in the sense of we start to think of it in a lens view of obedience, as the son following the Father's will, to glorify the Father, and that this needs to play out this way. Doesn't mean he has to like it, right? To say this was his friend, and he had to let him essentially die, and for his friends to grieve and have all this real pain, and knowing that he could have stopped it in a sense.
So it's really it's angry at the reality of sin and death.
Yeah, that he had to essentially not a bystander, but like be a witness to it, right? To be in that moment to allow this to happen, right?
God is always a witness to our suffering.
Yeah,
right. We see him witnessing it here. But you're right, like in every moment, like every hurt and sin that happens, God is a witness to it.
Yeah, and
so I think we get a little piece of what that's like here.
And I think that's a great little insight, right? Because we often have those questions, that come of like, where is God? Doesn't he see our pain or our suffering in this? And this is a very, personal example to say, well, Jesus is right up close, to the suffering and the pain. And he's shaking with anger of
and he's not
encountering it. Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I also think when you think about this anger of Jesus, it makes you think of in the Old Testament, we have language often of the wrath of God.
Yeah.
And that's something that makes people very uncomfortable, and I understand it completely. But so I'm reading it out on that recently. It really like opened it up for me to make sense. If you look at where the wrath of God is directed, it's directed at really sin and death. Like that's what the wrath of God is directed at. Not at the people, his children who he loves, who are doing these things, but at the reality of sin and death and the fall that we live in and the suffering that it causes us.
Yeah.
That if Old Testament wise, that's where the wrath of God is directed, it makes sense to me that here that's where the anger of Jesus would be directed to, at the reality of sin and death playing out right in front of him and the suffering and pain that goes with that.
Yeah, I like that. And, I've been doing that Bible in a year thing that a lot of us have been doing, and we're, ending, the Exodus and Numbers, and we're going to Judges now, when they're going to the Promised Land. And, spoiler alert, there's a lot of blood that's going to get shed here pretty quick, and it gets pretty messy. And a lot of those questions kind of come up, but and so I've been reading and looking for a few different stuff because it's
challenging.
It's challenging some of the stuff to reconcile, and there's been some of these insights to say but his anger is towards this fallen nature, right, where sin is prevalent, right, where these communities are overrun by sin, right, and it is it's in a sense kind of invading kind of God's chosen people, right? And it's getting them off the path of what he's asked them to. And it's interesting to kind of put this in context where we have it as a scrutiny, we have this story of Lazarus, and kind of jump into your end where he said like there's a small victory that happens here where he raises Jesus, or it raises Lazarus, but it's pointing to the raising of Jesus to come a little bit later.
I kept on wanting to say raising Jesus too, just because I thought when we think of rising from the dead, it's Jesus who does that.
Yeah.
I did the same in my homilies a few times as you did. But yeah, it's Lazarus who was raised here. You're right.
And but this idea of like to say, this is almost like, he has righteous anger to say, this is not the way things should be.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go,
I made you to
and
be.
Now in light of that, Good Friday to Easter makes a bit more sense to say, I'm going to, death is not the final word, right? I'm going to correct this wrong that I had to deal with before, but permanently, not temporarily, I guess. Yeah.
So that's anger number one. There is the first conversation is the anger. But then we hear the great line of Jesus began to weep. And there too he sees Mary weeping. He sees the Jews with her weeping. And then Jesus begins to weep.
Yeah.
And there's a vulnerability to that we wouldn't often expect.
And I think too is says Jesus wept, everyone talks to like the shortest phrase in the Bible,
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff. It's also like, it probably wasn't like 2 seconds.
yeah.
It's a short sentence, but when you think of the
weeping takes
description
time.
of someone wept, that's ugly crying. That's usually
Yeah.
when you collapse into somebody's arms, right? And is consoled. Like it is not a surface level kind of expression of an emotion.
Yeah.
And so it's very intentional, I think, to say like, this is the depths to which Jesus experiences, right? And kind of joins in. And I guess, we'll go into, you had that nice little quote in Latin there from St. Bernard of Clairvaux, but even just the sense of, I lost my train of thought, of the idea of the weeping is sometimes weeping doesn't change the result. As you think when you're grieving, when you're at a funeral and this kind of stuff, like your loved one still has died.
Yeah.
Right? But often through times of weeping in my own life, that there is grace, there is some healing, there is some there is some consolation that occurs, right? And usually it's in a context of community, at least mostly in my life, is maybe this is Jesus modeling that way to say sometimes I can't fix everything. There will be pains in your life that you will have to endure.
Yeah.
Right? But you don't have to endure them alone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, you're right that like weeping doesn't change it in the fact of like the person who's passed away is still passed away.
Yeah.
But weeping can change it in terms of like what it does to us.
Internally.
And the fact that helping us to heal from it, to come through the grief and to still be able to live life well in the midst of it.
Yeah.
So weeping is really a real change for us, especially not weeping alone.
Yeah, so maybe not connected to the external action, but kind of your internal disposition or how you encounter or recover from expression. Yeah, that's good. I like that.
Yeah. And so then there is that phrase, impassibilis est Deus, sed non incompassibilis. And I went into a lot of detail on that. We won't do it again, but it's the translation being essentially God is non-suffering. God in himself, can't be hurt, can't suffer, but he does suffer with. He does suffer with us.
Mm-hmm.
And that I got that phrase myself, not directly from St. Bernard of Clairvaux, but from Pope Benedict, who quoted it. And he quoted it in his encyclical Spe Salvi, Saved by Hope. And I thought I'd read here a little bit of where that comes from.
Yeah.
I got it on my phone here. And if people want to read this for yourselves, yes, Spe Salvi, Saved by Hope by Pope Benedict. Paragraph 39 is where he says this. So I'll just read a little bit of how he starts it. To suffer with the other and for others, to suffer for the sake of truth and justice, to suffer out of love, and in order to become a person who truly loves. These are fundamental elements of humanity, and to abandon them would be to destroy humanity itself. And that's, I think, interesting, even thinking of both like for us personally, but also thinking again of Jesus being fully human. So to suffer with others and for others is part of what it is to become a person who truly loves. And we know that, of course, Jesus did that.
Yeah, as you were reading that, another scripture was popping into my head was our classic one from Corinthians, right? Of the description of love.
Oh yeah,
that love, endures all things, bears all things. I always forget the order that goes in, and I think it was always that term of like endures and bears all things, and I was like, what does that mean, right?
Yeah,
and I appreciated that more often when I brought that back to what Christ, his example, right, of what he endures when we approach kind of, Good Friday in this, right?
Yeah, so it is to get enduring kind of is suffering with the person.
Is suffering with, right? To
when
say
you
that
can't fix it, but you'll carry it with the person.
Yeah, literally, the idea of carrying the sins of the world, right, upon that cross, right? That he bears our sins, right? He bears this pain and the sufferings of the world so that he can transform it, right? And so that's always been a go-to to me, right? And I think this kind of helps there, is to say sometimes the loving action is just to be with someone in their pain, right? To say you can't maybe remove it or change it, but you could say like, I will enter into this with you, right?
Absolutely.
And not just be on the sideline or as a witness to it.
And it's such a powerful thing, and often I think we don't see how powerful that is. But it is one thing to suffer by yourself, and it's something very different to suffer not by yourself. Like that just makes a huge difference, even if it can't be fixed. To not be alone in it is really powerful.
Yeah, and I've had even just a few encounters kind of in my life where on either end, myself or the other person has kind of shared to say, an expression of gratitude has sometimes come out to say, thank you for letting me share in this.
Yeah.
Which I was like, kind of caught me off guard in that moment. But it is a gift of vulnerability. It often has brought relationships a little bit closer, right? To say that in our time of need, our time of suffering, that we allow others to kind of come in, right? Because that's often how God comes to us as well, And I tend to be a stubborn Irishman, and so I usually have external mentors who say, Colm, like, you're not called often, most of the time, to suffer alone, right? That you have a community, you have people who love you and care for you. Let them do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's an act of love to let someone love you in that way as well.
And it's not easy.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's a very intentional thing that you kind of have to surrender. Yeah.
Yeah. So then we've been talking really deeply here about this is Jesus in his humanity, like suffering with us, sharing the pain with us, the anger, the sadness. But then the great thing is, because he is God, he doesn't only do that. So he not only shares in the suffering, but he in fact wins us freedom from it. He in fact heals us from it. So he does that first, we see, of course, by raising Lazarus. But then there is a reality that the Lazarus is a temporary victory, I'd mentioned, because Lazarus is going to die again. Like, we don't know when, but he's back for a time. But this really points to Easter, which is where Jesus shares even more fully in sin and death, like completely. And then he gets victory completely by rising from the grave.
Yeah, and that's the great promise.
Yeah.
And even here it's been kind of fun. I think with RCA we have a little bit of a tomb set up kind of in the hall that I think they used around for the story of Lazarus. But they've kind of left it up, and so some of the kids are like, is this for Jesus or Lazarus? And I was like, it kind of works for both.
That's the point. That's
which is awesome. Yeah. It kind of has led to, naturally, this kind of conversation, and sometimes we find, like, little toddlers after Mass hanging out in the tomb, and that's so
crawling in the tomb.
We've raised many children during this week, I find. Where is somebody? Oh, they come out of the tomb. But, like, I don't know. Maybe this weekend, just for me, it sounds stupid, but, like, I haven't often put Lazarus side by side with the Easter story, which maybe like I should.
Yeah.
But it was just, that was kind of an insight this weekend. It was like they're so interconnected, right? God often does this, and even going back, I've been reading much more through the Old Testament of knowing that, to say, like, God's always been showing his hand, essentially, to say, like, this is what I'm doing, right?
Right.
And the promise is there. I guess the question is, are we paying attention? And as I was reflecting kind of my own life, is like, what is God revealing to me and my family in this year of COVID and going in there, and like, and what is the promise that I need to cling on to, right? Like, and so even we were doing a little reflection at Junior Youth last night, and it was kind of that idea of looking at, like, the disciples, Peter and Mary and Thomas and the early disciples, and how they all struggled and doubted, and what they needed from God. And so our kind of reflection was like, what do I need to bring to God as I approach, Good Friday, right? Like, what is the petitions, knowing and trusting in God that he will give us what we need in his way and in his time, right? And having that trust. And so that's a lot of what's kicking around in my head, and I'm pondering right now.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. Like, God shares our suffering, cares about our suffering, and cares about it enough to relieve it, right? Not always immediately, but in time, especially in terms of looking at life from the perspective of heaven. Like, he does relieve it completely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Any other final shots of wisdom or challenges you want to give to the people as we get ready for Holy Week?
Get ready for Easter. That's the big thing. We get the hint of it here of what God is going to do, and then, because we know what's going to happen. But
exciting times.
Yeah.
Palm Sunday in person, waving the palms. It's gonna be.
Oh yeah.
It's gonna be. I'm just fun. The right word? I don't know.
Sure.
I'm unabashed. I love Holy Week.
Yeah. Oh, good.
Like, it sounds kind of weird. Some people are like, it's literally my favorite time of the year. I think it's the church at its best. It's our community praying and worshiping. It's just, everything snaps into focus for me. And I don't know about you guys, but I need a great Holy Week. So I'm praying that I can do my part of that and be open to what God wants to do. And I hope you can do the same.
Amen.
And until next week, we'll see you soon.